This video will cover how to cultivate resilience with positive emotion. It is the first one of many for this module. So we're first going to start with positive emotion. And to begin, we're going to cover the negativity bias. So our brains are wired towards the negative, and that's because our lizard or ancient brain, our core brain, part of it, which is the amygdala, it reacts to threat. It's home to our fight or flight response, and that's because our ancestors had to be skeptical and assume the worst in order for their survival. They didn't have time to ponder what that rustling in the bushes was. They had to assume that it was something like a jaguar or a mountain lion trying to kill them. So because of this, after thousands and thousands of years of evolution, our brain still focuses on what's wrong over what's right. Negative emotions also narrow our thought-action repertoires, meaning that when we're scared, we run. When we're angry, we fight. It's that bam-bam emotional reaction to a given situation. Barbara Fredrickson is one of the leading researchers on positive emotion. She says that emotions are actually embodied feeling states, so we feel that emotion throughout our entire being. That feeling state comes with an action urge and a response that gets us to change either the situation or our thoughts around that situation. So to break this down a little bit, we have a current circumstance. So emotions are situated experiences. Either that situation is good for you or it's bad for you. And not everyone will have the same exact, not everyone will feel the same around that given circumstance, which brings us to the appraisal of that circumstance. So our appraisal is how we interpret that situation. So our appraisal turns maybe the situation into a negative one, and maybe you'll feel despair over hope, which would be the positive emotion that you would feel. So our appraisal depends on our feelings and actions around that circumstance, which brings us to changes in our nonverbals, whether that's our face, our posture, our voice, how we actually feel, our physiological response to that given situation. And then at the end, we have our conscious response. So this can't be underestimated. It's very, very important in this whole process. We try to modify our changes to fit the situation. So if we're aware of this, we can try to change our response for the better by either changing our feeling states around that situation, whether that's our body, our posture, our actions around that. We could try to change our appraisal around the situation, so maybe interpret the situation in a new lens, try and reframe it in a positive way. Or if we have the power, we can also try and change that circumstance itself to invoke a more positive response or outcome. So with this knowledge, we can create dynamic change over time, knowing that we can choose how we respond to our emotions. So the bottom line here is that you're in control. You can choose how to respond. Again, whether it's reframing how you feel or your thought process around the situation, or the situation itself. This is just a quick note that emotions, like us, have a survival instinct, and they try to stay alive and fit themselves into the next moment, circumstance, or even interaction. So knowing that, we can consciously cut off an emotion that we're feeling if we no longer want to feel that way. Because you could probably relate to a time when an emotion was festering and just like kind of eating you alive. That's because it was staying with you past the circumstance that gave you that response in the first place. So if you have an emotion that you're feeling that's festering, you can choose to cut it off. You could say, you know what, anger? I don't want to feel you anymore. You're done. Goodbye. Or you know what, resentment? I'm done with you. The situation's past. It's over. Now, you could try and say that out loud. I've done it, and I find that it works. It sounds silly when you, in theory, but in practice, it can actually be quite effective. Another note is that emotions are contagious, which means that you can spread your happy or your sad germs or your angry germs to other people. People will pick up on the energy or the responses or the emotions that you are putting out there. So just keep in mind, not that we necessarily want to be spreading any germs right now, but just keep in mind the type of germs that you are spreading to other people and the energy that you're exuding. But the bottom line here is that We can control our emotions. Our emotions do not control us because we can choose how to respond with our physical feeling states, our appraisal of that situation, or the circumstance itself.